So welcome everybody to the Oakland Public Library Black History Month panel discussion called What's Work Got to Do with It? The State of Black Labor Then and Now. A few words first about Black History Month itself. A lot of us get cynical about Black History Month being celebrated in the shortest month of the year, but the origins of Black History Month aren't really about what was the shortest month of the year. Shortly after emancipation, Black communities across the country started celebrating in February for Abraham Lincoln's birthday and also Frederick Douglass's birthday, who was born February 14th. And so it became so kind of informal. It was well known in the Black press, but it wasn't really made widespread nationwide until we had a scholar activist named Carter G. Woodson, who started calling it Negro History Week. And from there, it was always celebrated again around the 12th and 14th of every year. Eventually that evolved into a full month. It was actually during President Gerald Ford's administration that the US president even made it official that February is Black History Month. But in any case, my name is Stephanie Hamilton, and I'm one of several library workers. I'm a library assistant here at Golden Gate, and I'm one of a cluster of a dozen or so library workers who put on something called Black Culture Fest, where we're all of African descent, and we collaborate and we put on programs, culture, and history events throughout the year. And we support each other, we plan ahead, and we also follow usually the theme of the year. So it turns out that Carter G. Woodson's group was called the American Association of the Study of Black History and Life, and they designated the year of 2025 to be Labor and African Americans. So that's why we're having this panel today as in honor of some of the legacy of Carter G. Woodson. So first I'm gonna introduce our panelists, and I'm so glad to have a group of really social activists up here. We're really honored to have them. Then I'm going to lay out a little groundwork of historical context of the history of Black labor. Then I'm going to have each panelist speak. So first I'd like to just introduce directly to my right is Darlene Flynn. When the city of Oakland established its Race and Equity Department back in 2016, Darlene Flynn became the first and only director of the Department of Race and Equity for the city of Oakland. And she's done this for nearly 10 years. Before that, she was in Seattle, spent more than a decade helping create a race and social justice initiative that became a nationally recognized model, which is how we found her in Oakland and had her come on down. Here in Oakland, she works with city staff and city leadership to train and reset practices that can reduce racial disparities and change the way the city of Oakland does business. So please welcome. To the far right is Danielle Mahones, Director of Leadership Development at the UC Berkeley Center of Labor Center. She has spent over 30 years organizing workers and developing leaders. During her 9-year tenure as the director for the Third World Organization, she co-founded 2 other organizations such as the Black Organizing Project and BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Development. Before that, Danielle spent a decade working in the labor movement. She helped organize the hotel workers in the East and South Bay and worked with what was then an SEIU local union 1877. Now it's a USWW union. She also worked with Justice for Janitors and helped better working conditions and better rights. She helped develop new organizing and contract campaigns for Stanford University and hospital. She has consulted with the East Oakland Building Healthy Communities Initiative, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and the Ella Baker Center. And where I met her, she was helping direct the Bay Area Black Workers Center. And I remember being in a room full of people when I first met Danielle, a lot of opinions going on about what needed doing. Danielle was so gracious and on top of it to redirect the energy to our shared goals and visions. So I've always been impressed with Danielle's work. And finally, we have Saabir Lockett. He's the Deputy Director of Civic Engagement at EBASE, the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy. In his work there, his emphasis is on power building and using groundbreaking civic engagement strategies to improve the conditions of underserved communities. Saabir is also the founder of Pathways to Peace. It's a lived experience and trauma-informed mentoring organization. And I know some people here who are doing that kind of work, so I hope you all can stay reading. Saabir was formerly incarcerated for 21 and a half years, and this experience helped him recognize from an early age that some people have access to essential resources and a sense of well-being, and others do not. It also gave him the inspiration to put incredible effort into a successful campaign for former inmates re-entering society, which we will have him tell us about tonight. So thank you and welcome. Infrastructure of this country being built on the free labor of African Americans. Slavery was, in a sense, this country's first labor theft. Right after the Civil War, there were 3.9 million African Americans newly freed who had no cash, no land, and no credit, which was the only way to survive in the South or anywhere else. They had joined about 500,000 already freed Black Americans who at least had a little more savings. But to have basically 4 million people looking for work was an astonishing thing, and it was a highly politicized time. What I'm going to lay out here is how the federal governments, state governments, and local governments opened the door for continued servitude of African Americans in this country. Sure, it's been a push and pull, step, 4 steps forward, take 3 steps back situation ever since we got here. Yes, the 13th Amendment outlawed the institution of slavery, but it opened the door wide open for involuntary servitude as a type of punishment for a crime. So, what did that do? That prompted local and state governments to set up a series of black codes in which they criminalized vagrancy, they criminalized joblessness, and they wrote it into their laws so that they could round up Black men and women who were out on the roadside and force them into labor camps, also known as chain gangs. They didn't have freedom of movement, and they didn't have pay because it was all legal, because it was a crime to be out there without a job. I see similar things happening today where city ordinances are making it a crime to not have shelter. Okay, so enter also the sharecropping laws that kept Black workers in perpetual debt so that they had to rent their cabins, they had to borrow their food, they had to rent the tools that the white landowners loaned them, And that was a way of being in perpetual jail. Skipping ahead to, in 1913, there were black workers in the federal government. They were mostly menial jobs or jobs that were only to serve black school children coming through. So they were segregated in practice, but President Woodrow Wilson made it official that the federal workforce needed to be completely segregated for white workers, and they relegated, and he actually demoted large numbers of black workers in the federal government, and they continued to have much lower pay, even when they were in the military, which died down after the Civil War. So the build-up to World War I got more black people out of the South because the economy needed workers to work in the dangerous factories making munitions. So that led to the first wave of black migrations to the north and the east. I'm going to fast forward real quick to FDR's time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because everyone is common in our American history that he brought in the New Deal and he brought social changes for the better good. But what we don't pay as much attention to is how FDR's New Deal actually excluded key components written into the law when it was passed. And this was because there was a great number of Southern Democrats who had gotten into office by keeping black voters from voting, and who continued to keep black voters. Basically, they got themselves elected because they suppressed the black vote. So they were flexing. The Southern Democrats were flexing a lot, so they ended up telling Delano Roosevelt, we like your New Deal. Your New Deal will allow for minimum wage, maximum hours. It'll allow for unemployment insurance when people are out of work. It will ban child labor. It will allow unions to bargain, and it will set up a Social Security payment when workers become too old to continue working. But the Southern Democrats said, no, you have to ban the following three categories. They didn't name it by race, but the three categories were agricultural workers, domestic service workers, and anyone with a seasonal or part-time job. So think of even today. Think of how many workers we know in this gig economy with seasonal or part-time work, with no job protections, and up until very recently, no sick leave and that sort of thing. This was started decades ago. All right. Other ways that the federal government built in discrimination. This meant that 85%, when the New Deal passed, 85% of all African American workers in the United States were included because they were all in agriculture or domestic service. The Federal Housing Act of 1934 had written into its law requirements for builders who wanted to qualify for federal loans to build segregated housing. It was required. If you want a loan from the government, you had to make sure you didn't let black people live there. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935, though it was a good idea, initially it really harmed African Americans by purposefully allowing the unions who were prevalent at the time to discriminate based on race. It also failed to cover sectors of the economy that employed African Americans. Again, the majority of the workforce was doing agricultural or domestic work, and they were left out of the written laws to protect workers. This undermined the bargaining power of Black Americans. But the buildup, okay, I'm going to mention two more things and then I'm going to let the speakers stop. The buildup to the U.S. involvement in World War II was also a very politically charged time. I remember seeing some PBS sort of feature films about a time when A. Philip Randolph was planning a million-man march on Washington. And this was back in the 30s and the late 30s and the early 40s. They had amassed, they saw that the war effort was building up, and they saw that Black people were getting left out of jobs. So word got out, people in such groups as the NAACP Corps, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the Urban League got Pullman porters together and various other Black folks across the nation to converge on Washington. When the president got wind of this, he hurried up in June of 1941 and issued a committee called the Fair Employment Practices Committee, set up to investigate discrimination against Black folks. This committee, it was a good idea at the time, but it only lasted 5 years, and then protections fell away. But in the meantime, this war production employment actually doubled the number of African Americans who got work. So the number who got those kinds of jobs, which were decently paying, rose from just 3% to over 8%.
This contributed greatly to the growth of the Black population here in the Bay Area.
Yes.
Because they came here to work in shipyards and do military jobs. Pullman porters were already here.
Yes.
And organized. And then when that happened, that is how, because before that, Oakland was a white city. It was not, it was a suburban to San Francisco. It was a white suburban city, really. And it was because of those labor changes that Oakland became diverse with regard to Black population. Quite quickly, almost all of a sudden.
Yeah. So then after unfortunately, that Fair Employment Committee, it ended in 1946. So within a year, it had disbanded. And by the end of 1946, 1/3 of all African American residents in the Bay Area were out of work, and 40% of the women, Black women, were unemployed because it did give multiple jobs to both genders. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead. There's also some more I can tell you about job suburbanization, where a lot of the big industries that used to be in Oakland moved out to the suburbs and left Black residents behind. The GI Bill helped white soldiers get loans to build houses, but excluded Black soldiers who had come back. And we have stories and films, local films, Cheryl Fabio's film in particular, that talks about how some Black workers got smart to it and actually had white friends sign for a house for them so that they could move in and integrate that neighborhood. And it wasn't easy, it was trouble, but at least they got the legal paperwork to get it done based on their allies. So at this point, I would love to have Darlene take it from here. I'm just doing some context and just trying to show that it's been written. When people talk about structural racism, they are talking about things that are written into laws that make it legal and normalize discrimination.
Yeah, I probably don't need that mic. I actually project pretty well, but if you need amplification, just let me know. I'll pick it up. Thank you so much. That was such a great summary, and I really appreciate you covering so many of those details, because the work that I do actually depends on helping more and more people understand how things got this way. If you've seen Ibram X. Kendi's book, you know that this country, while it was doing these things to Black people, withholding opportunity, discriminating against, criminalizing from the very beginning, very beginning. While that was going on, it was normalized through stereotypes and through stories that were told about Black people that have gotten into our national narrative and confused people about who we are, who Black people are. They don't realize what we now know, if you're paying attention to science, that Black people are the same as white people. Genetically, there is no difference. So the stereotypes cannot be true, because there is nothing genetic that would have caused those differences. There's no correlation between the genetic markers of skin color and hair shape that correlate to any other talent, behavior, predisposition to even disease. Many of us were brought up saying that, well, sickle cell anemia is a Black disease, isn't it? But it is not. You all know about sickle cell now, don't you? A lot of Black people from Africa do carry the gene for sickle cell anemia, but so do a lot of people from Greece. So do a lot of people from the Mediterranean. So do people from other parts of the world that are not Black. Because what that is a genetic mutation that protects you from malaria. It's protective against malaria. It's also bad for your health. It doesn't help your health overall, but it is a protective factor. So it was my mother, who was a nurse, told me that I needed to be tested for sickle cell, because if I had children with a Black man, we might be able to give our children sickle cell by bringing the gene from both sides. She was a nurse, and she had been trained to believe that it was because I was Black, because I was half Black. My mother was white, but I was half Black, and so she wanted to make sure I understood that I had a predisposition to this. And it's true that we do, but it's not because I'm Black. It's because my people came from malaria zones, right? May have come from malaria zones. And that's why that gene is carried there. So a lot of stories got made up that have enabled the country to perpetuate the mistreatment and also not to repair the harm that was done. So this is, when we talk about this, we're talking about systems that did things, that mistreated certain people, that held certain people back. But the other side of that coin, and the one that we don't talk about so much, is they were also giving things to white people at the same time. So it's not that they just held us back while the foot race started and ran out ahead of us. It's that they actually held us back and boosted the folks that got to start first. And so we don't talk about that as much. But what we can do when we think about that, I say that not to be melancholy, because when I start to teach about this to people who haven't learned it yet, it can be kind of heavy. It can feel bad to learn that the government did this on purpose and that it was beyond slavery. It didn't end with slavery. Slavery didn't even end. So in that trivia, contest you're in at some point, when they say, when did slavery end? The answer is it did not. Slavery did not end. It is still perpetuated through the 13th Amendment, as was already mentioned. So, but even when the formal chattel slavery system was ended, which is a little bit different than the prison slavery system, the other codes and strategies kicked in. And throughout time, that has continued to happen. It morphs. Racism just continues to morph. So why is it important to understand that? It's because that is pathological. That is like a disease. It's a brokenness in our society. And most people inherited that. It was a legacy that they inherited that they didn't even ask for. We didn't ask for it as Black people, and white people, honestly, most of them didn't ask to be misinformed, miseducated, and taught stereotypes and distrust of Black folks. They didn't ask for that, they just got it. It was already here. It was already here when any of us arrived. And we began to be immersed in it, absorb it, be socialized into it, etc. So it's really important to unpack it, because if we want to fix something, we have to understand how it was built, why it was built, and how it is maintained today. So we look at what happened back then, and we look at, so how is it being maintained today? Because our conditions haven't changed enough. Now I have to say, my father was born in 1914 in southern Missouri. He was the son of a sharecropper, and had to run away from debt in order to get free. Again, sharecropping, another form of slavery. And all of that was part of my family's history. What I know from learning my father's and my family's history is that my life was different than his life because of civil rights changes. We have made progress. I've never had to step off the sidewalk for a white person. At least I never thought I had to, and I never did. Right? My father, as a young boy, learned to do that most definitely, to save his life and to protect his family. Right? So things have changed. We've made progress. So I always like to say, when we're looking at the history and it gets a little heavy and a little bit depressing, please remember that people have been fighting for freedom and liberation from the beginning, from when it went wrong, and we have made progress. It's just that it's our turn to take it to the next place. The baton passes. We have not arrived yet because we still have these disparities. So I'm really lucky. I get to work for the city of Oakland, and I did work for the city of Seattle before that. Seattle is also my hometown, has a very interesting labor and racial history of its own, quite different than Oakland's. It's kind of the reverse of Oakland. It's about 70% people of color across many races, over 100 languages spoken in Seattle, like in Oakland. So about 30% people of color, about 70% white. And it was really pretty much all white, maybe 1% black. There were a few black folks there until the war effort brought black people to Seattle in a few numbers. And it's never gotten to be, as in Oakland, we were never a majority in Seattle, or even close to it. Even when you lump all the people of color together, you don't get a majority. So it's a very different city culturally. It's interesting that I was born there because Washington State was one of the few states in the 1950s that my parents could safely be together, or legally be together. They met in St. Louis, Missouri, where they absolutely could not. They had a secret relationship and they ran away from Missouri. So that is how I ended up being born in Seattle, Washington. I am a product of systemic and structural racism. Not a terrible place to grow up, as a matter of fact, because it does have this very libertarian history, which is kind of a live and let live. It's a lot different than the South in how it plays out the racism. And yet the racism is just as palpable there. The redlining was just as real. The withholding of opportunity just as real. The differences in school quality, health care, all of those places where you see differences in treatment just as real in liberal old Seattle, Washington, as they are in Missouri. It's just that there's a culture there of letting people be, just kind of letting people be. They can make it if they can make it, and if they don't, that's on them. So it's different than the South that has been so active in making sure that the boot was always on the neck. And that made a difference. It made a difference in my perspective on race and how I came up as a mixed race child there. But it didn't keep me from having a black experience. And so fortunately I had a black family who moved to Seattle. And I feel like I had the best of both worlds in many ways, because I was gifted with light skin, and we all know that makes a difference. And I know now, and I can look back in time in my life, and I'm now an elder. I'm a bona fide elder. And I can look back in time, and I know the moments where I scooched through the crack in the door, or under the door, or somebody even held the door open for me a little bit, in a way that I know they would not have held the door open for my dark-skinned sisters and brothers. I just know that now. I know because now I've been observing it with open eyes for a long time. So I know that my experience is not necessarily a typically black experience, but it is most certainly not a white experience either. It is most certainly not. So I get to have this viewpoint, and it has caused me to migrate toward doing this work. So I'm working in city government, looking at systemic and structural racism, teaching people inside the city to be able to recognize systemic and structural racism and begin to address it in our policies, practices, and procedures. It is not affirmative action. It is not diversity and inclusion. It's not DEI. We don't do DEI. Now, I've been DEI'd to death because I came into the workforce in the 70s when women and some people of color were coming into the workplace for the first time in many locations. We did a lot of DEI. We had to, because people didn't know how to keep their hands to themselves. They didn't know how to talk to women. They didn't know how to be around black people without dropping N-bombs. There were all kinds of things going on that had to be addressed. Sometimes it's called sensitivity training, cross-cultural, cross-cultural formalization or forming, because sometimes for white people, this is the first time they've ever been around people of color. And for men, it was the first time they've ever been around women who felt that they had the right to an upwardly mobile career. So a lot of changes were happening when I came into the workplace post-civil rights. Now, most of those civil rights changes, or the civil rights changes, boosted white women much more than they did black women. So because of that, we do our work intersectionally. And what that means is we don't just look at gender when we're looking at gender, we look at the intersection of gender and race. Or we look at the intersection of sexual identity and race, or whatever other identity, able-bodiedness, sometimes referred to, and race. Because anytime we add race to any marginalization, it gets worse, right? That's how race works. It lays on top of everything. So we lead with race and recognize that people also represent intersections. We have more than one identity. In other words, we're not just our race, we're also our gender, our sexual orientation, our physical abilities, many other things that mark us in society as belonging one place and not another. So I feel really lucky because I've been able to do this work for nearly 20 years now. And most of that time, a little more in Seattle than here, but I've been here for 8 years. And Oakland has been such an exciting place to do this work, because here in Oakland, we don't have to convince people that we have a problem. We just have to convince people that we can create a solution. And so my job is to show people the path, the methodologies, the way of framing the questions and the problem in a way that is data-driven, community-centered, and outcome-oriented. So it's a very structured approach. It's not a whole lot of feelings, even though we all have a lot of feelings about this, let's be clear. But it's not about my feelings, it's about here's what's going on, and here's how it got like this. What will it look like to reverse engineer this? So we can have conversations with people that maybe have never had a race conversation before at all, and might be really uncomfortable talking about race, but we can say, no, we're just talking about data. We're talking about data and a little bit of history about how this happened. And government has a profound responsibility to address that, because government was in it up to here. Up to here. So it couldn't have happened without government, no matter what juncture you're looking at. So it's been really exciting, and I feel very lucky. And I know I'm not supposed to talk too long, so I'm not going to say too much more, except to say that I think we're entering into a difficult time. I think we all know that. We know that DEI, there's a war on DEI.
What's DEI?
That's
I know.
Yeah, exactly. What is
I'm
it?
very outspoken about politics.
So am I. So I'm going to try not to get too political, but I'm going to say we all can see what's going on.
Yeah.
And we know that that this is really a pushback because it's working. Just know that every time they push back on DEI, they're nervous. They were nervous.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What other people can we do? Because every day you look at the news and all these court fights, it's not doing a damn thing. And I'm sick of my representative not doing anything as a Democrat.
Well, then we camp on their doorstep. So,
Okay.
so really, this is about revitalizing our democracy. So the civil rights changes that we benefited from, whether we realize it or not.
They didn't take it away.
Well, they're trying to. They're trying to roll them back. But those civil rights changes did not happen overnight. That was Brown versus the Board of Education. They brought that lawsuit almost 20 times before they won that lawsuit. They kept improving it. So what we have to understand is it's going to be time for a new movement, and it may take us a minute to build it up to the level that is going to get things back on track. But it's not going to happen without us. Our elected officials are not going to do it unless we make them. That's how politics work. It's how it worked in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s, and it's how it works now. It has not changed. But we are in an existential crisis right now where we could lose our democracy, and that would be a different kind of setback.
Mr. Hang on, one more question. How can I encourage that people? Okay.
I need to wrap so that I can pass the torch here. I just want to make this last.
We're gonna have time for
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of Q&A.
So we got a few more people.
Yeah, I got to give the floor. I got to. So I just want to say this is a moment where our immediate fight has got to be to resist the dismantling of our democracy, because the progress that we have made, we did use our democratic process in the civil rights times and other times. We need this democratic. It's not perfect, but it's the best system that I've seen on the planet so far. And if we lose it, it will set us back further. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is we need to revitalize our democracy, because I think we did let things drift. And we're going to have to get back in the fight the way people used to be in the fight. And when people were in the fight, it was working. So I'm eyes open about the struggle before us, but I also believe that history is on our side, and I do believe that the arc of the moral universe curves toward justice, though I cannot see its end. So, thank you. You'll be fine. I stayed out of labor for you.
Y'all are amazing. Okay, good evening. I'm Danielle Mahones, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Black workers and labor. And I'm going to try to do this in broad strokes, and then to get to where you're getting, and I think what's on people's minds is this moment, right? And where do we go from here? Okay, so you're going to be my slide person. So next slide. So a couple of things that have already come up through this, right? So we want to lift up that there's been a historic economic exploitation and exclusion of Black workers from our economy, and in some cases from the very organizations that should be advocating for our rights. We know that capitalists and bosses use massive amounts of racism to promote capitalism, to promote their profit making, to promote division, and to undermine worker power. And when they do that, we as Black workers are impacted disproportionately. I'm going to talk briefly a little bit just about the racism that has also existed in the labor movement itself, but also don't want to just talk about the negative. We have some amazing Black labor leaders that don't often get any shine that I'm going to shout out tonight. And then I want to talk a little bit about the role of organizing in terms of unionization and also in terms of public sector work, and how public sector work has been one avenue that Black workers and families and communities have used as a pathway out of poverty and into more economic security. Next slide. So I wanted to just harken back a little bit. Stephanie talked a little bit about the national, and I'm sorry, this is so small and tiny, but what you're seeing here on this graph is what led up to when you see these big bars. These are the number of strikes. There were millions of workers striking in the early part of the last century, from 1919. People talk a lot about the 30s, right? But it was like a build up to the 30s. So what got the National Labor Relations Act to even be a thing was like all of this level of fight, right? Where it was making a crisis for the capitalists and for our political system to have this many workers shutting down industry every day, every other day. It was a serious thing. It wasn't just that we elected a good president who cared about workers' rights. It was because these folks were in the streets. They were sitting in their plants. They were like about that business. You see this break that happened. Who can imagine why there's all of a sudden there's no strikes? War. World War II, right? So it's like, okay, what folks talked about before me, there's this, we all gotta unite and deal with the Nazis and the fascists, but maybe we didn't need to do that now too, here. But, so there was this understanding of labor peace. There was an expansion of jobs. It was where women and Black workers were getting more opportunities in jobs, but also then some kind of way, so we won these rights. More workers have the right to organize. More workers are negotiating contracts, and they're winning. They're winning better benefits. They're winning pensions, you know, and so they're not striking as much. They're not feeling the need to like go all out in the streets. Now the thing I'll say about that is then there's this backlash, just as there was a backlash to any time, any progress, just Black people's progress, workers' progress, women's progress. There's always going to be the comeback, right? Y'all are getting too far ahead. No, we got to squash this. And so there's an attack on labor, and we really see it hit when Ronald Reagan comes into office, right? And he smashes the air traffic controllers. He, decides that we can permanently replace strikes. We're not going to ever have that situation. We're going to terrify people. We're going to make it so that people are afraid to strike. And you can see that it worked. People stopped striking, right? Next slide. So while strikes led to better conditions and new workers' rights policy, as Stephanie already said, but not for all workers. So we get the NLRA and we get the NLRB that enforces, and we get this act that gives workers the right to organize. But again, it didn't include everybody. Next slide. Stephanie already covered this, so I'm gonna go quick, right? So there's a legacy of, just real back. So she talked about this, but agricultural and domestic workers are excluded primarily because that was Black work at the time, right? So fast forward also to our like Latino, Filipino brothers and sisters, agricultural workers in the state of California. Like those poor working conditions, there is a direct through line to this. This is that, right? Eventually, agricultural workers win the right to organize here in California, all of that, right? So like that happens. But domestic workers still have been fighting state by state to win better protections and better rates. Okay, now, next slide. So then some stuff about the early part of the labor movement, just to hit on, again, broad strokes. So there was racism, but there was also splits in the early labor movement and different ideas about what unionism even was about. So you have the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and you have the Congress of Industrial Unions, the CIO. And they sort of had two different approaches to what they thought unionism should be, and sort of they also had ideological differences as well. So the American Federation of Labor was more about craft and guild unionism. So like, okay, imagine like a newspaper company, right? And there's the folks, the reporters, right? And they have a special skill. And so they should just be in their own union. And they're gonna have the right to like win improvements because they all have this skill. Now the printers, the people who print the newspapers, they have a different skill. So they're gonna be in their own different union, right? And the people who mop the floors, well, they're gonna be in their own different union, right? And there was, in that sort of worldview, there is classism at play, right? And there's a hierarchy about like who should have more say and rights and wages and benefits and all of that. But that was sort of their approach. Versus the CIO approach was more of a, nah, if we want to fight the boss, let's all be together. Let's organize wall to wall. I don't care if you're the nurse or the janitor, we're all in this hospital together, and if we want to win power, and if we want to shut the thing down, we need to shut the whole thing down. We don't need to be fragmented in this sort of like craft unionism, right? So the very different approach. In the CIO, you also had in early days, folks recognizing that the boss is splitting white workers and black workers and pitting us against each other. Hey, Brandon. And so they were all about, they were like, no, right? Like, and in the CIO is where you had the socialists and the communists. It's just a different ideological approach to power, but they often clash, these two segments. Eventually, the two things merge, right? But just to give a little history of that. Okay, next slide. And then also just to give, it's Black History Month, so let's like raise up some of our amazing Black labor leaders. Mm-hmm. So, and also look at the time, because I feel like a lot of times when I'm talking to young people, they have this impression that, you know, the labor movement was all white until about 5 minutes ago. And it's like, no, we've had Black labor leaders, like Mary McLeod Bethune was born in 1875, right? Her parents were enslaved people. She got a scholarship to college. She started a school for Black girls that turned into a university, that turned into her being the president of like the National Colored Teachers Association that eventually became part of the NEA. We have A. Philip Randolph, right, who was also already talked about. And not only with the organizing, the 10 years of organizing to build up the sleeping car porters union, but his role in the broader civil rights movement that Stephanie spoke of earlier, right? Not only in that first Million Man March, but also then he rose to power in what was then the AFL-CIO, got the AFL-CIO to mobilize 40,000 people to go to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom with MLK. Right, and started to insert that the labor movement had to be supporting of civil rights, right? So we had folks up in these formerly racist institutions who were making change. Bayard Rustin as well, Black queer man, deeply embedded both in the labor movement but the civil rights movement. Dorothy Lee Bolden, just a shout out, she organized the first National Domestic Workers Union out of Atlanta, Georgia. Of housekeepers, organized 10,000 housekeepers, and you know, was really about this fight, and then went to Martin Luther King and was like, help us, you know, you need to talk to the president. He's like, you need to talk to the president, like you are the leader, right? And so we do have and then there's so many others that I can't fit on the slide, but up to like even present day, locally, we've got Keith Brown, who's the head of the Alameda Central Labor Council, former head of the OEA, Kampala, who's now the head of the Teachers Union in Oakland. Like, we've been up in this movement leading this work for a very long time, and it's often not talked about. Next slide. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on public sector work because it really has been a particular vehicle for good jobs. And along with the bad that Stephanie mentioned, right, so there was like good and bad, right? So some of the first government jobs that were giving opportunities to Black workers, like way back from Reconstruction, was the post office, right? And like if you think about it, like I know in my lifetime growing up in the 70s and 80s, like a lot of postal workers were Black, right? And that was a good job. And you had benefits and you have a pension, right? And it was one of the first avenues where Black families could find some economic security. And so part of the point that I want to make in this, because as we know, through attacks on labor and also privatization, attacks on public sector work, I want folks to understand that attacks on public sector work are attacks on Black workers. 27% of the postal workforce is Black, and they've been coming for the post office for years now, and they're getting closer every day. There's also the fact that federal, not just at the post office, but in all types of agencies, HUD, you name it, they have hired Black workers at higher rates than private sector corporations and companies. So again, going back over 100 years, right? So where a lot of the solid sort of like middle class, Black middle class has been situated, has been in doing that public sector work, being civil servants. Also that work is serving our communities, so Black people having it, like, also wanting to be like, okay, when somebody comes to the social service department, I want there to be Black people there because we have a history of not being treated well by these people, right? So like, on many layers, right? When they attack the public sector, it's not just attack on the workers who work there, but the services that are being provided to some of our most vulnerable community members. The other piece, again, is just that there's greater rates of unionization in the public sector, better pay, benefits, pensions, job security, right? You're not finding a lot of the precarity that you see in, say, the gig economy or in retail, where it's like, oh, you were scheduled to work, but now we don't have enough, like, we're gonna send you home. Like, that type of thing had not been as prevalent in the public sector as you would find in private sector work. And then we also know that in state and municipal government agencies, we're actually hiring at even higher rates than the federal government. So like you have state workers, like you go into a DMV in Oakland, it's like everybody Black, right? But also you notice you go into the DMV nowadays, half the workstations are empty, right? Because there have been a series of cuts and laying off of people and elimination
How
of
come
jobs.
the government does not back? When I was running, I was a union rep, and in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the government made sure, like the utility company, that had to go to them, had a certain percentage to hire.
Yes.
You know. Nowadays, they don't do that. A lot of diversity programs have been cut,
Yeah.
and I noticed that.
Yeah.
And then sometime before I retired, you would talk to these young people, because the union used to sponsor apprenticeship programs.
Yep.
And the first thing young people want to know is how much money do you make, not how to do the job.
Yeah.
And that's a doggone shame, because our pride as a union person was getting trained to work a job.
Yeah.
Not worry about who gets what. And I seem like the government does not back that anymore. I know it started at the federal, like you said with Reagan,
Yeah.
kind of, but to state.
Yeah.
And now a lot of jobs, when I was a union rep, would go from here to non-union states.
Yes.
And we do nothing
Yes.
to stop that, and I wonder why.
Okay, I don't know if I have the answer to why, but I can say a couple more things, and then I think we're gonna open it up for Q&A in general, right? Oh, right, oh my God, we have Saabir, oh my God, oh my God, am I over time? I got 2 more minutes, how many minutes? Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, so just really quick, just again, wanted to just demonstrate that there is really a connection between unionization and union density and income, and equity and income, and economic inequality. So what we see is that as the density of unions, which is that red sort of dotted line, as that falls, the income inequality is growing greater. And this chart only goes to 2005. So this is even bigger now, given what we have going on, right? The gap is huge, right? So next slide. So because of this, because now we have this overgrowth of billionaires, which our position is that every billionaire is a policy failure. Nobody needs that amount of money, period. The end of the story, right? And there used to be, they were taxed at a level that you couldn't actually ever get there. And now that's all fallen away. And so
It didn't fall away.
well, no, people, again, to your point of the push of giving people a head start. So by giving folks who don't need more money tax breaks, we're seeing their incomes exponentially, right, just go through the roof. And then we're seeing right now, because I just couldn't help myself, Stephanie, you said don't be political, but I don't know how we talk about this. I don't know how we talk
The
about
politics is
this.
coming to us.
It's just here, right? So it's like, it used to be, I'll just say this quickly, the way I was trained up around power structure analysis, like the very powerful usually were behind the scenes. We didn't actually know their names or who they were. We are in a new day because these folks just rolled up out to the inauguration front row seats. So you got the four richest, people one in the world and the other three here in the country just showing up, just taking over, right? It's no longer they're behind the scenes pulling the lever. We've got Elon sending mass emails to people and trying to fire people. It's absolutely insane.
And that's the difference between capitalists and oligarchs.
Yes. And then next, I think this is it maybe. This is it. Oh, well, no, it's not it because I didn't want to leave it on that downer. So to go back to Darlene's point, which is that we actually, while this does feel stark and terrible and different than what in our lifetimes we've experienced, we also know that we know how to fight, we have fought, and we have won. And so by building the reason that, I have been part of the labor movement for as long as I have and continue to try to, train shop stewards and rank and file workers and union organizers and whoever else wants to, tenant unions, whatever, is because I know that when we organize, we can win. And so if you click it one more time, I just wanted to show, this is Los Angeles, this was the United Teachers of Los Angeles, 34,000 educators who went on strike, 100% out strike in 2019, during Trump's first run. But because they were so tight, because they were so united, they didn't just win improvements to their wages and benefits, but they were really fighting for schools that our students deserve, and so they were also able to win things, around lowering class size, around increased supports for students like counselors and nurses, green spaces, better support for immigrant students, right? So it's like we know that when we organize powerfully and we build united, strong organizations, but again, where we can actually turn everybody out, it's not the same 20, I know you've been to union meetings where it's like the same 20 union members that always come, right? That's not gonna get it, we gotta get to this, right? Okay, so that's my time, and Saabir.
Oh man, I feel like I gotta go after these three powerful houses. But yeah, I get started. They will get the slides up. My name is Saabir Lockett. I can just go. I know we have a little time, right? So, all right. So we just skip through some slides once they get started. But there we go, right there. Yeah, events. Yeah, so this was great. I'm sitting up here learning a lot. Learning about yeah, exactly. Like the racial justice and equality. We learned a lot about labor. I'm gonna go in a different little area. I want to talk about some of the formative stages of the carceral system, right? And then its impact on our community members, Black people, right? And then some of the things that we're doing today around policy to make differences Next slide. That's just like who we were. We're actually work at an organization that focus on economic justice and racial equality. But I'm also utilizing my story. As they told you, I was incarcerated for 20-some years. And through that experience, I learned a lot. So right here, I was born in Compton, California. Half my life I also lived in the Bay Area. And in this history, I want to highlight, like in 1969, it was the highest crime rate in the state of California, in California, right? It was the highest crime rate. Then by like 1972, we had the highest per capita murder rate in the U.S., named most dangerous city in the U.S. today, the 8th, and Oakland, the 5th. In 1974, I was born. So this is just to highlight some of the things that was happening prior to my upbringing. By 1981, we had Ronald Reagan inaugurated as president. By 1985, the Associated Press published a groundbreaking story revealing how cocaine trafficking between CIA and Nicaragua triggered a flood of cocaine in the black communities. And I remember this time. This was a time where just about, you're talking about like in Richmond, you're talking about in Watts, and in other places around the country.
Do you know why?
We're gonna have some questions later, but I appreciate you. But then in the other areas around the country, I remember trains coming, dropping, and stopped, and the train doors would be open, and we would go to the trains, and it was just crates of guns and crates of drugs. Those that was in the inner cities at the times would know. I was born and raised up in the projects, and it was always these trains. And I would say, just like North Richmond, they got the same epidemic, where they was just giving out these guns and giving out these drugs, and next thing you know, we had all these people in the neighborhood that were like the big homies and stuff selling guns, and people thought they were making money.
But I just have one point, but you know, during those times, a lot of black companies, though, I mean, a lot of large company corporations left those areas in Compton, because I remember, I have relatives that used to work in the industry down there.
Exactly. Now, I love the way this story, how we have been doing this now, because some of that has already been addressed. So I'm trying to go to a different area, because Darlene addressed it, Danielle addressed it, and now we're going into a different direction, right? So with that though, let me see, let me pull this back up. No, you're good. This is my pause. So with that though, it's just to say, like, I was arrested by like 1994. I was arrested and I was in prison for a life sentence. And I use my story as an example because these formative statements created the environments, right? The environments wasn't just there. These environments was created. It was disinvested into, right? And it created the conditions for us to have like an informal economy. And the informal economy, again, you was sold drugs, you was in the streets, you was panhandling, you was doing a lot of different things. And these set the conditions for the school to prison pipeline, and it set the conditions for so many black people to be strung out on drugs, be strung out on dope and guns for violence. We was killing our own people, and we was in the gangs, and we were doing all this stuff, and we was detrimental to our own communities, and we ended up in prison before we was 18, 20, 21 years old. And I ended up in prison. This was me at 18 years old, 20 years old in a penitentiary with a double life sentence. Never to come home again. And this was the conditions for the majority of our communities in the inner city hood with the homeboys and the homegirls that was facing these same issues. So, we do a little bit more than that one, but I want to just highlight some of the points here though, because California has the nation's highest recidivism rate between 65% to 75%. So what does recidivism mean? Not only do we go to jail, we get out and go back. And then it's a revolving door. It's a revolving door, right? So then we just, again, feed into the system. And what we know currently, we just had in this past year, Prop 6. Prop 6 was designed to abolish slavery inside of prisons, right? If it would have passed, do you know how many labor laws would have been enacted behind like classifying the workers that's inside a prison who get paid pennies on the dollar? You're talking about 15 cents for a job that is $40 an hour. While these prison industrial association and complexes are actually still getting tax breaks and making the money they would have been making, you know what I'm saying, off the backs and labors. Because as Darlene had mentioned, if you got locked up, that was another means to be slaves. Because that's what the Constitution says. Slavery is legal if you're incarcerated. right? So then this became another meeting. So the recidivism rate is just feeding into that same channel. So I'm gonna speed us up a little bit more. I see that they're pushing me up. You hitting all the slides. I wanted this, each one of the slides had something I wanted to talk about. But I'm gonna speed it up a little bit to like some of the work that we're doing today, right? To help like formerly incarcerated folks. So my organization does a lot of work around like bandbox and equitable development deals. What is so important about an equitable development deal or any construction that happens is that whatever happens in its beginning stages sets the conditions of some work conditions moving in the future, right? That's what happens. So we work on what's known as community benefits agreements, right? And why is this so important? Because we center that there's going to be development in the city of Oakland, then that development has to address the impacts on community. And what we do have, I think the Black Panthers actually created this, was a racial equity and inclusion on any development, and it has to go through this racial lens to understand the impact on its community members, right? But what we focus on is good jobs. And why do we focus on good jobs? Because there's a lot of people that's disadvantaged based upon state violence. And then what is state violence? State violence is policies, laws, rules, and regulations that's designed to exclude somebody from a different position. And as we already heard the panel discuss, mainly jobs and Black people, right? Excluding us up out of these jobs. And if you look at the growing rate and need of individuals in Oakland, it has to do with people who are formerly incarcerated. So we focus on good jobs for formerly incarcerated folks, disadvantaged folks, you know what I'm saying, with some type of barriers to employment, where you have laws to discriminate against them, and then we write these policies, and then we try to get these policies enforced at the beginning of any development, so that if that development is leased to the city, then that means 66 years of access and upward mobility for the people that we have won within this community benefits agreement contract with the developer, that they have job access. So that's formerly incarcerated people, again, that's single moms, you know what I'm saying, that's people that have some type of drug addictions, that's people where there's any policy designed to exclude you. We're trying to throw all that in at the gate, because that's going to ensure that you have opportunity. Not only,
What about the 66 years?
oh, so if it's so when you're in development deals, you have 66 years is in a lease with the city of Oakland. That's part of the city's charter, right? And if it's a lease, you can win a deal up to 66 years. If it's a sale, then you can win a deal up to 99 years, right? So a lot of the development, so when we redid the redevelopment at the Oakland Army Base and Community Jobs Oversight, right? I currently am a mayor-appointed commissioner of the Community Jobs Oversight Commission, where we oversee policies that we won in 2012. These are pictures right here where we had one of the biggest band-the-box fair chance win in the state of California at the Port of Oakland, where we won access and inclusion for formerly incarcerated people. And that's why you see like fair chance to advance, right? Again, fair chance to advance. It was all about the fair chance laws, right? Because fair chance laws gives the individual who was formerly incarcerated an opportunity to get a job without being discriminated against, also known as band-the-box, right? And then we know these band-the-box laws, they're corrupt. I can go over history on that, but I really want to just focus on like some of the work that's being done now. So as we're talking about the history of race, inequity, and we're talking about labor, we also talking about what are we doing policy-wise, right? On the ground to change some of the conditions for our people, right? And so I'm just speaking about that right there. And then so some of the things that we win in these good jobs includes opportunity good jobs through 50% local hire and 25% disadvantaged hire is a requirement on our band-the-box policies. And then the opportunity for formerly incarcerated folks and residents and workforce readiness assistance, placement, and construction and warehouse jobs, right? So not only are we talking about operations jobs, and we're talking about years, so policy happened, then you gotta build it, right? So then we have to have inclusion and upward mobility and labor. So we put in those contracts an opportunity for our folks to get hired, get trained, and get placed in labor. Then after you get the buildings and everything built, now you have operations jobs, and we put in those contracts access and upper mobility within the buildings and stuff that they build, or the businesses that's therefore ran, right? And again, this is done by integrating like project labor agreements, provide for pre-apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship placements, and creating opportunities for pathways in construction careers. We also tailor our services for job seekers and employers through the West Oakland Job Resource Center, right? And that's also a training center where we design and create a funding source for, so folks can get, again, the proper skills, the training, the soft skills and stuff like that as well, because we know when our folks are coming from incarceration and our folks are like trying to make it in society, it can be hard, right? It can be hard. It's a lot of trauma, it's a lot of stress. You're coming out that life and you're also trying to make it in a world that said, there's no place for you here. You know, and like my own story, like I am just a resemblance. I'm not a success story. I'm a success story for myself, but there are so many people in my same condition that didn't have that opportunity. You know, because I wasn't homeless. I was facing those challenges. I did not have an opportunity. I was fired from so many jobs because I had a record. And how many of our people, again, fall right back into the carceral system by recidivism, do another crime and go back to jail. Either because it's easy or because they had to try to make it happen and they were starving, they need to feed their families, they need to feed their wives, their kids, or just the sheer manhood or patriarchy and misogyny that a lot of folks have to deal with and say, I need to make it somehow by any means necessary, and then they go back to jail. So these policies are really important and impactful when we're talking about like development in the city of Oakland, and we're talking about how we can use policy to try to change some of those conditions. It ain't the end all be all, but it is some steps towards the right direction, right? No, it's okay. You can, I'll bounce around it. But then I want to talk a little bit. Let's see. I don't even know what slide that is. That's the ban the box slide. So that was a little bit. So if folks don't understand what ban the box means, and when we talk about these policies for job inclusion, what is it attacking? So ban the box is every application that you file for a job, it has a box that says, are you formally incarcerated? Once you fill out that thing and say you're formally incarcerated, 90% of the time, your application is not even gonna go through. They're just gonna wash you out. So these policies are important because what it does is it bans ban the box. It makes it a requirement for businesses to not use ban the box, right? Not to have that box on the application, so that you have an opportunity to be heard, to be seen, to be interviewed, and have an opportunity to get that job. In addition to what that does, is it also implements policies that say you cannot be discriminated against because you have a record after you get your initial interview. And that's really important because now, if there's not a nexus between your incarceration and the job function, now it's illegal to fire you. So these policies set up the conditions for a formerly incarcerated person to be successful. And then, so I put this on here, was like, it's inclusivity and opportunity. It is also breaking the cycle of recidivism. It is a call for fairness and justice. And it's also building stronger communities. Because we know once a person gets a job, they become stable, right? And then we also fight for good jobs, not just any job, but a good job, a union job, a job with benefits, medical benefits, and all these things are also written in these policies so that an individual can now feel whole and be contributing members to their society. And now most of the folks who can get this opportunity start to right the wrongs they did in the community. They once the problem, now they become the solution, right? And I strongly believe in that, and that's why I do this work. Some of the things that we were able to accomplish with the Oakland Army Base 2012 redevelopment of that site was both establishing the West Oakland Job Research Center for training, but since the Oakland Army Base redevelopment, we had significant progress has been made in workforce readiness and job placement. By April of 2019, 23% of the work hours were completed by apprentices, with over 50% of these hours going to veterans, individuals with convicted records, and the long-term unemployed, and others facing unemployment barriers. Between 2012 and 2018, the West Oakland Job Resource Center assisted Oakland and Bay Area residents in earning over $14 million in wages, facilitated over 4,000 construction hours, and over 95,000 apprenticeship hours. In 2018 alone, West Oakland Job Resource Center served over 300 clients. So these numbers are really important. When you're talking about individuals who did not have employment, couldn't get employment, had barriers to employment, this policy made it possible to bring $14 million of wages to our people's pockets. That means they wouldn't go into jail for dipping cars. In addition, one of the other things that we did with this policy that was really important, and as I stated, I am also my current executive director of both board members of the Ormy-based Community Jobs Oversight Commission. One of the things that really advanced and was important about when you got policy wins, that you have an oversight body. So in this, not only do we create a policy to give folks job opportunities who are formerly incarcerated, we also create an oversight which was key to success, because now between the city, the employers, whether they're construction folks or building trades or wherever it is, they have to produce receipts, because we have a requirement that 50% local residents have to be hired, both in constructions and operations. Then we have a requirement of 25% of those folks have to, in addition to that, have to be disadvantaged people with folks formerly incarcerated. So now every month they have to produce records and receipts on this process, right? If they're meeting this threshold or not, and if they're not meeting this threshold, we have liquidated damages in place that goes, and when they have to pay those liquidated damages, that money goes back into workforce development for the same people that we're trying to create job opportunities for. So, you know, it's really powerful when you can use policy, you understand legislation, you know, in addition to when you already have a union job. We're talking about people that don't got opportunity. You know what I'm saying? People like me, I really care about the people that's on the corner. You know what I mean? That don't have an opportunity, right? So when you understand policy, or you connect to organizations that understand policy, or I just want folks to know that there are people out here doing great work for our people that otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. And then I put on here just some pathways forward, you know, is I think that between, when we're talking about history, we're talking about racial inclusion, we're talking about labor, we're talking about just the average person that's trying to have a job and get medical benefits, you know, community and labor continue to work together to build differences, to bridge differences in order to implement policies within development agreements that uplift the floor for returning citizens is really important. That's just describing everything I've been talking about. Also, community and labor partners to advance PLAs, which is project labor agreements with local hire, targeted hire, fair chance hire to open the door for meaningful operations jobs, and to push back the discrimination policies in hiring is also really important. And then I had just some questions that I would want to just pose to the audience, right? Just to think about, not to answer today, because we're gonna open it up for questions and answers, but I just want folks to think about, in what ways can you see yourself advancing job opportunities for folks with a criminal record? Can you envision a world where the work you do can set formerly incarcerated workers up for success? And what missing in your area of work that has hindered your ability to address issues related to the bad box? Thank you.
Mr. Lockett spoke on the bandit box. I've been knowing Stephanie for long. You could have told me about it. In the city, I was born way before you. And I was incarcerated. But I was incarcerated for growing marijuana. After me, now it's been exonerated, expunged, so But anyway, the union offered programs for people who had felonies. And I happened to hook with the union, and I worked for PG&E for 40-some years. So there is hope for people who have records. All you have to do is, talk to people. I found this information out through this library, because Stephanie knows I live around here, about certain utilities, East Bay Mud, PG&E. They have programs that have to sort of pick up people who have records. And it happened in the early 80s. I was one of those people chosen with a record. And like I said, it's been very good for me. And I can tell, it kept me from that cycle. Because I used to grow it, sell it, until I got caught. And once I changed my life, my daughter graduated, because that's what helped me change, because I wanted to see my daughter grow up. I took custody of her. I didn't want to be that dad that she had to see me behind that cage. And the first time she ever seen me that way, it broke my heart. And I knew I had to do something, man. I mean, I really had to do, I had to change. Because that's something I needed to do. And when I found out the program through my parole officer through the library, it helped. And like I said, I was there for 40 years, and I recently retired. And I strongly recommend, like you said, check those programs out. Because if you're tired of doing what you're doing, going back and forth and not having a future, there are programs to help you. But you gotta take it. It's not gonna come to you.
For sure. So there are worker centers, right? We provide a lot of resources through our worker centers around different opportunities in labor. If you have a record and stuff like that, to get access to the unions who have those type of programs. But I think what is so important about what I was expressing around the policy that needs to be changed is that everyone doesn't know that. I was an individual that I was a part of the union. I was a part of CWA. I was an AT&T outside plant technician and was fired on site. Because of that, went to site in my truck with my tools, did all the program, did everything, and was fired on site. That would later spark my desire to change the conditions, utilizing policy, understanding the historical impact of policy on our people, and particularly for the incarcerated folks, and then wanting to get engaged, and then further become a commissioner, because I want to also be a part of the oversight to enforce it.
And that's very close to the work that I get to do in the city. There are different levels of help for people, or different levels of intervention, including individual interventions, opportunities to actually get some additional services because you were formerly incarcerated, and perhaps have some doors open for you that way by a specific program. And that's very important, because it takes a lot to change your life. So just the decision is a big decision, and then you need support as you work through that. However, there are a whole lot of people for whom that's not enough, because it's just too toxic. The water's too toxic, and they can't find their way to those programs, because they have been, the social contract and the conditions in their mind have been so changed. And so that's where these policy changes are so important, because then somebody's really got your back. It's not just you showing up. Yes, you had to show up. You certainly did have to show up, but it's more than that. The policy is behind you too, to support you, so somebody can't just walk in one day and yank that job out from under you because the policy has changed. And so we need these different layers. We need all of it. It's not that one is more important than the other, but there are so many policies that were set up to keep certain people from thriving that we have to change those policies too. Because we keep putting people back on track, but then they keep getting knocked off by some policy breach, basically. And that is not fair and just. So it's both things are really important, and this work has really made a difference. City of Oakland passed ban the box a long time ago. And it's been, Oakland tends to be out front on things like that. But there are lots of other people who are very hesitant, and it was very hard to get it done in Seattle, where I came from. They hesitated much longer. They did eventually get it done, but it took a lot of advocacy from organizations like eBase to make it happen.
Anybody else?
I mean, I don't know if it's a question, but more a gratitude servitude. Thank you for all of the bits that you have all shared from every sector of all the things. And also, I think something that I think about often and am pretty plagued with in my mind is that I don't know which one of you made the distinction, but you know what it means to be under oligarchy versus capitalism. And with the rise of fascism, that's never been very far away or distant in any way, shape, or form in the creation of America and the colonial project. Reflecting on these times where there were these huge strikes and this huge mobilization of masses of people to actually like encourage and like move change, which is what it is because we are the masses that are feeding the structure that is also keeping us where we're at. How it feels very just complex and really hard now in this time, given the rise of capitalism over the extent of American history and the ways in which, how we were talking about in these unions, that there are they're like closing up. It's like the printers are doing this and the tech people are doing this. There's just all these sections that are created, and then seeing how that is also perpetual in our society, how we are in these like sections and these silos, exactly, and these conversations just silo in these moments, and we're not all able to be in conversation and organize and mobilize in the same ways. Even though we have all of these advances in technology and all of these advances in how we can be in communication. And it's just something that I've been trying to mull over and figure out how to find the words for solution when thinking about how so many folks are there's been so much disconnection and so much apathy and yes, and cynicism and just things that are really hard in encouraging masses to mobilize in the ways that actually do create the type of like structural change that's necessary.
Can I, just on that, you know, I think part of the current strategy, right, which is not that different than the beginning of time strategy. There's just new technology to help it move faster. But so we have this like onslaught of them on the offensive of just doing outrageous things like every 2 hours, right? We have the ability to be scrolling and being bombarded, right, with this information that all of the goal is to make us feel powerless and alone and unable to do anything about it. So while we do need to be informed, right, we also need to manage how much of that we're taking in versus how much community building we're doing. How much time are we spending talking to our coworkers, talking to our neighbors? What organization, okay, maybe I don't have a union, but maybe there's a great community organization that I want to be a part of. Where can you plug in? I think is extremely important in this moment. And through doing that, there will be opportunities, right, for coalition building, for alliance building, you know, for bigger sort of actions. But I think one thing I would say is that mobilization is important, right? It's important to go out on the streets, but the ongoing deep organizing is more important, right? So it's like, if you can turn out thousands of people but only one time, versus if you can build an organization that continues to grow over the test of time and can actually, you know, make real change and then enforce those changes, that's where you want to put your energy a little bit. So I encourage folks to like figure out, you know, find your thing, find your
community.
Yeah.
Find your community of resistance, and communities of resistance take many different forms.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're labor unions, sometimes they're non-profit grassroots building organizations. I don't know if y'all consider yourself that, but you seem sort of like you are.
We like,
Base building.
consider like grass tops maybe, but
That's
we're like advocacy politics.
Base building,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I think that base building is so important, and there's nonprofits that just deliver services.
Right,
Y'all are
no,
more than
they're
that.
not
That's
that.
what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
I mean, grassroots, grass tops, I mean, that's kind of a subtle distinction, but my point is There are a lot of nonprofits out there that are mostly just about delivering services to people, and those are services that people need. But there are also organizations that are more advocacy and base building organizations. I would look for a base building organization, but any angle that appeals to you. The most important thing is that you craft a place for yourself in the movement that you believe in, that will bring you joy being involved in it. And it's going to be different for me than it is for you. This is my joy. A lot of people, wouldn't take the path I took, but it works for me. Find yours and do it. It's kind of like exercise. What's the best exercise? The one you will do, right? Consistently. That's the best exercise. Same thing here when it comes to how do we change the world. Figure out the thing that you will do to change the world and do it every day. Just like exercise, do it every day. And don't worry, because you're not going to be able to do it all anyway. But if everybody did that, imagine the power in it. And encourage others to do it. That's where base building prepares people to go to Sacramento or to go to, wherever you need people to go. You're preparing people, you're building them up. And so I think that is the answer to your question too. What are we supposed to do about this? Find your place in the movement and be there every day. And boy, I'll tell you, I am having a hard time breaking my habit with the doom scrolling. But I'm starting to realize that it's robbing me of time that I could be doing something else. So think about it that way. Not just that it's not good for you psychologically, it's not, but also that it's time, and time is precious. We only have so much of it. And so, yes, stay informed, spend enough time getting informed every day so you know what's going on, and if you need to pivot somehow or another. But then make sure that you're reserving time to actually get out of a silo and build bridges and coalition or whatever it is that appeals to you. And community is everything. Connection is so important when times are this tough. Trying to hold this in isolation by yourself, it's too much. We can't do it. It will break us down. So find your community of resistance and show up.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is I think there's like the larger scale movement building and organizing. And so at heart, I am a grassroots organizer, so I understand what it means just to talk to your cousin. I understand what it means just to talk to your homie that, you're maybe don't even have these conversations ever. But then what does it mean to be passionate about something, to be fearless enough to express it, to be vulnerable enough to I have a concern about something, and then one person turn to two people turn to three people turn to six people, and then y'all together have this idea which you want to change, and then you get with people who is doing that change, and then, and you're building your network, right? So, and I also think something that's really powerful, about hope and tenacity, especially when someone that come from where I come from, where no one would have thought I would be where I am today, that I would have an AA degree, a bachelor's degree, that I went to law school, that stuff, they wouldn't even have thought about that, or that I'm even in the jobs that I currently have in decision-making roles, right? So I think about hope and tenacity, and that dreams do come true. And then Darlene said something, I can't say it as pointed as she did, but it's about we're fighting for something that we're not gonna see. We may see it, but also understanding that the future and the conditions, and we're handing these batons over, is just really, really important to understand and grapple with, because, we might not see the success. But that don't mean, you know what I'm saying? But that ain't to say we don't bring the fight.
I think some of the names that you put up there in that slide when you were that was you, the labor leaders. I think of what they got to see and what they didn't get to see. But they did the work anyway, and we're standing on their shoulders. So it's important to think of ourselves in that way too, that whether we see it or not, we're the shoulders that the next generation are going to stand on.
So we got so visionary. My questions were too particular. I'm so appreciative of all of you. Social justice warriors.
You put Bainard Reston up there, and he was a little. I don't think I knew about him until recently because a film was just made about him, and it was produced by the Obamas, and I think it's on the Netflix platform. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you watch it, because what I loved about it was I was too young during the Civil Rights Movement to know what was really going on. But it gave you this look behind the scenes through the eyes of a very marginalized person. He He was very marginalized in the movement, and it shows how he navigated that and how he made a difference anyway. And it was through his commitment, his determination, and also how it went behind the scenes of the March on Washington, because we all have seen the picture and watched some of the film. We've all seen it in a way, but did you ever wonder how that happened? There's something about this movie that just kind of, it happened in a very particular way. It happened because a whole lot of individual people found their place in the movement and did their job. No one person did it all. Rustin had a very important role to play in it. He had a very important role to play, but what he was doing was mobilizing people that did their jobs so that could happen. And it was very inspiring to me. It was just, I don't know why, I knew I would enjoy learning about his life and him, but there was also something about it that says, yes, that's how it happens, that's how it's done. And if we've never been there, and a lot of us haven't, because this is the first time maybe it's been necessary for us to be there, it just makes everything seem possible. Everything is possible.
It is.
Thank you all for coming. I think this is a good closing point. Oh, you had a question? Oh,
Yeah, I just want to say, like the divider up here in San Pablo, I played a big role in that because I used to hang out in front of the court panel and I got work and stuff, and they had all white guys working there. So I used to go to the guy in charge, I was like, hey, the supervisor, I said, man, Oakland's like 75% black. There's no black guy. And he just walked away. I said, okay, I have a plan. I got like 3, 4, 12-year-olds, and I taught about, the parts on the equipment. So we stand over here looking real tough, looking at us, looking at the kid like he don't know nothing, but all the equipment's getting broke. I said, it can't happen that you have some black people.
I have some people who know how to fix something.
What's up?
And the next thing I know, we had 5 or 6 black people working on it.
There you go.
That's what's up.
Yeah, I remember that.
You just had to keep showing up.
What company was that?
Right down the street.
The divider right in the middle of San Pablo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had an all-white crew.
When they were building it.
Oh, when they were building the divider. Okay, got it.
No, I was just a spectator.
Thank you for the share.
I'm seeing it. Great tactic.
I want to thank you guys though, really, because I miss Stephanie. Anthony told me to come. Stephanie, next time, let me know. But this is real reforms. I'm gonna bring the grandkids because they need to learn. Because sometimes they're into that computer, like you said, scrolling. They don't even go outside no more. I come home, I have neighbors, kids I don't even know, with my grandkids. Why don't you guys go outside? I had to bribe my grandson with a game to go outside. We have to come in when the lights come out, street lights. We have to get out.
We couldn't get in until the lights came.
Yeah, can't get them out. It's a shame.
Well, but those skills that they have and that ability to navigate online, they can use that in their activism. You just have to get
I want them to apply to that.
Yeah, I mean, we need that. We need that, because I'm not very good at technology, but the young people are really good at it.
Oh, God.
The younger people are so good at it, and we need that because we're in a technological world now. And so there's a place for everybody, and the moment will come where you'll help them see that. You'll help them see that.
Good.
Yeah, that digital divide.
It's real.
Well, thank you, everyone. Help us out to more greens and cornbread. And thank you so much to the panel.